Greater New Orleans on LAE is brought to you by the Historic New Orleans Collection, bringing history to life, and by Entergy. Entergy, the power of people. Good evening, I'm Tom Bagwell, and welcome to Greater New Orleans on LAE, More Than Television. A new documentary and new resource center tell the story of Southern writer, philosopher Walker Percy. And here to share part of all of those stories are Win Riley, who directed the documentary about the Southern novelist, and Rhoda Faust, who helped create the new Walker Percy Center at Loyola University. And welcome both of you to Greater New Orleans.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you here. If Rhoda's name is familiar, it should be. She owned the Maple Street Bookshop for 37 years. Now she works as an administrative assistant to Mary McKay, the director of the new Walker Percy Center, and we'll be talking much more about that later. And Rhoda served as an advisor to the documentary, and we'll be talking about the film as well.
And Tom, I didn't help create the center. I'll just say that I came on board after, but I can say more at the end. But I didn't help create it.
Okay, we'll talk about that in greater detail.
Thank
you for the clarification.
Sure.
Well, Win, who was Walker Percy?
I see Walker as one of the great American novelists. He's probably best known as the author of The Moviegoer, which is a novel that won the National Book Award in 1962, which he wrote here in New Orleans on Milan Street. He's a sort of a philosophical novelist, known for novels like The Last Gentleman, Love in the Ruins, The Thanatos Syndrome. And he wrote philosophical essays. He was a doctor who turned to literature and philosophy.
Rhoda, when I ask you who Walker Percy is, he had some of the facts and figures there. What's your quick answer to that question?
That he was a remarkable writer who conveyed ideas that transformed my life, and I think have transformed many people's lives. He helped people get back on get on the path to finding answers that I personally find very important. So that's the emotional answer, but also a brilliant writer, and I was glad he did win the National Book Award to give him the national notice that he deserves.
Born in Birmingham, but grew up in Mississippi and spent considerable time in our state. His early life was filled with tragedy. Is that right, Rhoda? Yeah,
and it concerned him, or it was a steering point, I think, for his writing and his life, really. His grandfather killed himself, and then his father killed himself. And his mother had a tragic accident with his brother in the car, tragic automobile accident. And so I think one thing Walker Percy struggled with his whole life was the heritage and heresy of suicide. And he was very proud of himself and sort of bragged that he had decided he was not going to commit suicide. But the other tragedies, I guess, which turned out not to be, was his contracting tuberculosis, and then that veering his life off. But I don't count that really as a tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Percy didn't start off as a writer. He got his medical degree from Columbia. How did he become a novelist?
I think Walker, he would say that he had a knack for writing. I think he knew that early on. And he grew up around writers and novelists. But the story of how he became a writer is really the crux of or the center of the documentary. After medical school, as Rhoda said, he got tuberculosis, and he spent a great deal of time reading Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard and existentialist novelists, and became sort of enamored of them, and at a certain point in his life made a decision in sort of the existential tradition. He decided and said, I want to have a life. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to live in New Orleans. I'm going to get married.
We're going to show you.
I'm going to be a Catholic, too.
I'm going to be a Catholic, yeah, very important.
Which plays into his writing, and we'll talk about that momentarily. By the way, we will show you a trailer from the film coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Now, Rhoda, you actually knew Walker Percy in several contexts. In what projects did you work with him?
Well, I was lucky that he was a family friend. Finn, his brother, and my dad were friends, and then Walker and my dad got to be friends. So I knew him when I was a child, even 5 or 6. But then as my mother started a bookstore and then I took it over, he was very generous in coming to sign books and to work on autograph parties till he just couldn't tolerate making mistakes anymore about people's names. He was very sensitive about hurting people's feelings at autograph parties. But for a long time he did do that, and then he provided some speeches of his to my fledgling publishing company. So I got to work with him on those, and then on Confederacy of Dunces, he sort of turned over Thelma and her plight to me at a certain point when he wanted to go on with his own writing, and she was still needing help. So that's to mention 3. There may be others, but
you knew him to be a generous man, certainly.
Very
with his
generous.
Time, and meticulous, as you
yeah,
talk about.
And also, though, it was nice because it was symbiotic to a certain extent that when I was selling his books and then published those little books, he wanted my help to help his daughter at the Kumquat, her bookstore in Covington. So he made it very clear I needed to give him a whole bunch of free books so Anne could sell them, and that if I had any advice that she could use. So it was, it worked out really well.
Worked for everybody.
Yeah.
When is there a consistent message in Percy's work?
I think there is. It's very difficult to sum up, though, because Walker wrote about things that touched on psychiatry and philosophy, history, faith. But I think if I had to sum it up, I would say that this notion of the search, which comes up in The Moviegoer, what is the nature of the search, you ask? It's what anyone would undertake if they weren't sunk in the everydayness of their own life. I think the message from Walker is to find meaning in the finite and temporal in our world, something that has deep significance for you. For Walker, it was Catholicism and his faith. But I think he's sort of posing a question to the reader. What is that defining commitment in your life?
And what's stopping you from undertaking the search? And a lot of his writing has to do with the horror of this world and all of the temptations and all of the distractions and the choices we make that keep us from the search. And he used to be inspired by vitriol sometimes to satirize the parts of society that intentionally or unintentionally take us off our search.
My guess is he wouldn't have had a smartphone. as we look at distractions.
No, it's an interesting question. I mean, I've asked myself, in sort of working on this film, what would he have thought of Twitter or Facebook or any of the social media?
I think about it every time I look at my kids with it, texting all of their friends.
Well, in fact, there's one short quote, if I could, sort of apropos. Is that all right?
Sure, absolutely.
All righty. This is to do with everydayness that keeps us from the search. And it says, people will do almost anything to escape this dreariness. Booze up, hit the road, gaze at fatal car wrecks, shoot up heroin, spend money on gurus, watch pornographic movies, kill themselves, even watch TV. So he felt strongly about coming out of that world that we find ourselves in, those worlds.
Talk about